So without further ado, to the fans at home, we also wanted to extend well wishes to everyone, and we wanted to thank our frontline responders and first line workers for everything that they're doing right now. You're tuned in, of course, to Sports Media in the COVID-19 era. I'm your host, Bobby Ski. We have a terrific group of panelists today. Longtime ESPN radio executive producer John Martin is with us, MLB official scorer, journalist, and author Howie Carpin, and of course, ESPN baseball insider, ESPN baseball guru, Marly Rivera. But thank you so much for being with us today. I mean, I really wanted to start with this concept of, can sports survive during the pandemic? I think, Marly, baseball right now has been the top point of conversation. I was hoping that you could update us on the latest and greatest from baseball.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone for being here today, and thanks, Bobby. And in terms of baseball, I think this is a really good day that Jim picked to do this, because it is exactly 2 months ago, right? It was Friday, March 13th, when the official shutdown of all the sports happened. And not only that, curiously enough, and I'll go around this, in a curious way, today would have been the first series that the Yankees played against the Astros. And what's funny about that is that was the topic of the offseason, about the sign stealing scandal. And all I can tell you is that there isn't a single person who is thinking about that today, right? Unless you looked at the schedule. Now, baseball is, like Bobby told you, at this point where the conversations are happening between the Players Association and the Commissioner's Office in Major League Baseball, they're already trying to focus right now on player safety, right? Health and safety. That is the number one thing that they're focusing right now. But the biggest hurdle is going to be, as always, the economics. Some of us, a lot of us here, especially at the top of this screen, are old enough to remember the 1994 strike. And it's starting, to feel like maybe that's a possibility, but hopefully not. It is in the best interest of everyone involved that we have baseball this year, but we have to keep things in perspective, right? One of the things that one of my colleagues, Jane McManus, always says is that sports are a reflection of a healthy society. So you need to really, you can't just start sports when things are not going well in society. And we know that in New York, we know what has happened. So it's very important that we get that under control. We're at the bottom of the curve right now. Talk about a term I never want to hear again. And in terms of that, so that's a positive, but when are we going to be able to restart this? And I think Bundesliga, which is the German football league, is going to start the regular games with no fans. And I think it is something that we can look at as baseball fans and as, baseball executives and media, of what they had to do in order to have Bundesliga start. The reason why I bring that up is because soccer rosters are about the same size as a baseball roster, about 25 players. So all the protocols that we can learn from Germany and see what they can do in terms of bringing baseball back is going to be interesting. It's going to be a new form. We've never seen anything like this, but then again, none of us ever went through a pandemic like this.
100%, Marly. And I mean, clearly right now you've started to see the return of sports. The UFC this past week with some fights with no fans. NASCAR this weekend is returning to action again with no fans. So it begs the question, and I'm going to ask Howie this one first. Howie, since you work in MLB press boxes, would you feel safe returning to work once baseball is back in business?
Well, that's a very good question. I haven't been presented with that opportunity yet. I know that I've been following the guidelines here in the Bronx where I live, and luckily in my neighborhood, people have been very cooperative and respectful of each other. I haven't heard about too many cases breaking out in this neighborhood alone. So I would trust the people if they felt it was safe enough to come back, at least with the stipulations. If I had to wear a mask to be at a press box, I would do it. If I had to wear gloves to be at the press box with a mask, I would do it. I would feel safe with those stipulations. There would be some trepidation, honestly. I couldn't feel totally safe, but I'm not going to be hibernating in my house my entire life. I mean, there comes a point where you have to get out. Now, how they'll handle the press box attendance is another story. As you know, I'm an official scorer for MLB, so I have to be in the press box to do my job. Whether that will change, it remains in question. I'm sure Marly can attest to the post-game probably changing. There will be likely no access I'm sure either they'll bring players out to the media that's in attendance or have something like this to conduct a press conference via Zoom. So there's going to be a lot of changes, upcoming that we're going to have to adapt to if we want to get, back involved with doing our jobs.
That's a great point, Howie. And that's actually a question that I wanted to ask John. John, you've been producing events for many, many years, and whether it's the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, how do you think the press box is going to look moving forward? How is this going to look?
Well, I think Howie makes a good point about the fact that in terms of being the official scorer and the print media, be it newspapers or internet, they have to be on site. I don't think there's any question about that. There has to be a physical presence. When it comes to broadcasters, and it's been a growing trend over the years, entities have become more inclined to put broadcasters in a studio and work off big monitors. And I think you might very well see that early on in the process, partly to just help in terms of health and safety of all who are going to be involved in the games, whether on the field or in support or the media. And I think probably even more so with the NBA, if they do get up and running, that's really a much easier bunt, to use a baseball term, in terms of a remote broadcast. And then I think for all the leagues, it's going to be, let's see how it goes. I talked to some people on the broadcasting side of baseball a week or so or 2 weeks ago, and there was a real push and pull within about, do we go to Arizona and do we make that the center point, and then how do we house all players, and again the whole health and safety, and another thing which we haven't touched is testing. How do you start a season and proceed, and also keep tabs on, is everybody healthy? And we also know, I think, over the course of this thing, that the testing isn't completely 100% accurate. I can tell you from personal, I just had a follow-up checkup with one of my many doctors at my advanced age 2 weeks ago, and I had the antibody test. And it came back what they call equivocal, means maybe I've had it, maybe I haven't. I've had no symptoms, but I have to go back and get retested. So these are a lot of the questions that are that really impact moving forward. And I don't know there are any concrete answers at right now.
John, of course, I'm personally excited about the return of baseball, and there's a good feeling on my part that I think that most of the leagues will be able to make things safe for the players, at least in my mind. Maybe I'm just hopeful about it, but I'm definitely curious about whether or not the leagues can make things profitable. I think that's a big question. And of course, the big news yesterday is former Cy Young winner Blake Snell coming out and kind of saying, hey, I want to get paid. I'm not going to be willing to play for half or even less than. So Marley, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on those comments from Snell, because I think they were kind of shocking. He seemed kind of tone deaf about this.
I think that we have to separate two things here, and it's something that I want to be very clear about. There is something about the message, and there is something about the messenger, right? And it is very clear that the messenger was the incorrect one, and that the way that he did this, for lack of a better word, and off the record, was completely ridiculous, right? So that's, and completely tone deaf, which is a perfect adjective of what he did, an adverb, modifying a verb. And then, but not only that, going back, so this is what I would like to explain to people what's been agreed so far. So at this point, the Players Association, or MLBPA, which are the initials for them, they have agreed to a reduced pay, right, according to the amount of games played. I don't know how many baseball fans are out there, so I'll treat you like maybe not everyone knows. So there's 162 games in a season. So they're going to get paid according to however many games they played, right? So if you're going to get paid $8 for every game you played, now you're going to get paid $1 for every one of those games, however many they are. And right now they're hoping to get in at least an 80, 100 game season if we're lucky, right? If we're very, very lucky. So that's been agreed upon. What's happening now is exactly what Bobby said, profitability. And the problem is that because there's not going to be any fans in the stands, that is a far-fetched dream. It's not going to happen, right? It's very sad for all of us who are baseball fans who are in press boxes, who feed of the energy of the fans. It's going to be tough to see that, but we've experienced it before, and it's what needs to happen. We cannot put 50,000 people in a stadium at this point, right? It's not something you can do. So the owners are going to argue that they're not making enough money. Hence, I'm not going to give you the same paycheck that you would have earned. So the players should take, some sort of prorated paycheck also, not only because of the length of the season, but also in terms of earnings. And the problem here, which is because I don't want to hear the millionaires versus billionaires argument, which is the problem that happened with what Blake Snell did. He's out there talking about making his $2 million when the rest of us, when there's people out there, hoping for a $600 stimulus check. Like that is, talk about tone deaf, right? And we in New York, we know that. We know how tough it is here. We have seen 20,000 people die. So, right, we are very aware of what COVID has done in our city. So that was completely tone deaf. But now the point that he does have is that when owners make more money in a season, players don't get paid more. Right? Like if you agreed that your salary was going to be $1 a day, and that season happened to be great profitability, like they made all these profits, you don't get a bonus. You get paid exactly the same because that's the contract you agreed upon. And this is the argument that the players are going to make, and they should make a much better argument than what Blake Snell did out there. And not only that, the other part is players have to play to the best of their ability and 100%, whether there is one fan in the stands, 0 or 50,000. The game is the same. So that is going to be their argument. Now, it's tone deaf. It's out of touch. It is terrible. But what he should have said is, we agreed to a contract. When owners make more money, we don't make more money. So we should just get paid as a prorated rate, only related to the amount of games we play. So that's sort of in a nutshell. I apologize that I go on, but I wanted to kind of explain to everyone what's happening. And it's always been really interesting to me, and Chief probably can answer this a lot better than I can, or maybe Howie, because I have always been fascinated as to why always the fans turn on the players. Like, it's always been like a fascinating topic to me, because the players become the greedy ones. And one of the theories, I've been talking to a lot of people about this and a lot of players, is that people can relate to the player and not to the billionaire. So then people, once, had an at-bat in high school and they won the game, and it's still they're playing a game. So they, you should be so lucky that you get paid to play a game. But they don't cite, it's kind of interesting to me that the billionaires get the better brunt of this. Like, John Henry, the owner of the Red Sox, who also owns Liverpool. I mean, this guy is loaded. If JD Martinez, who is a hitter for the Red Sox, quotes out, JD is going to be the greedy one. It's not going to be John Henry. So that's going to be really interesting to see. That's what happened in 1994. A lot of you weren't even born then. So I would suggest you take a look at what happened in the strike. So that's basically, in a very long-winded way, what's happening right now with the compensation issue, which is going to be the number one issue after safety and health.
Marley, I'll go.
Go ahead, John.
I was saying I'll go back to 1981 when free agency and arbitration all became major players in terms of baseball's compensation, to the rank and file. And during that strike, which Howie can correct me, I believe was 50 days, there was a lot of really negative vibes towards the players. And the owners, as it wore on a bit, there was, I think, some fan sentiment, all right, let's settle this thing. But there were a number of players at that time, too, who I remember Reggie Jackson telling me on the record, like, hey, man, I haven't had a summer vacation in, since I was like 12. So for me, this is great. And, fans heard that and said, are you kidding me? But here's the thing. Once they resumed and once they start to play, fans forget all this. And any animosity they might have, they'd be in the stadium and they can take out and boo and yell and whatever. Won't have that opportunity this time. Well, that's all right. I think when there's a resumption and across all sports, I'll be very interested to see what the television ratings are, because as we have talked, people who are fans are starved for it. Give me some live action. Let me see something that's really get my juices flowing again. So I think baseball is going to lose the revenue, obviously, off, fans in park, but the ad revenues might be very significant. And the ratings, I think, will be very significant. Remains to be seen, but.
Howie.
Off Marley's point where she was wondering why the fans get on the players instead of the owners, I have a theory on that.
Please.
Owners are not out front. They're in the backdrop for the most part. You don't really see them. You know their names. They're not on the social media platforms, but the players are, and they're on the field when they take the games, when they play the games. So they're a convenient target. So I think that's part of it. If you think back to '82, when Reggie Jackson came back with the California Angels and how they booed Steinbrenner that night and not Reggie, that was the kind of the invert portion of fans' distaste. So I think, to talk about what Marley was talking about, I think that the fact that they're in the backdrop and they're not out front is the reason that maybe the fans take it out on the players more than the owners.
My husband always says no one has paid a cent to watch an owner do anything.
He's right.
Howie, what upset me about the comments from Snell was really the kind of two separate conversations, because at one point he kind of says, safety, yada, yada, yada. But hey, if you're going to pay me my full salary, then safety goes right out the window. I'm willing to come back and play baseball.
Yeah, that was the disputing point there. I mean, look, he's frustrated like we all are. He maybe took it a step too far, the way he used the social media platform to express his views. I mean, that wasn't really the smartest thing to do at this point in time. But we're all frustrated. I mean, I have to work. I'm lucky I can still work from home once a week on Sirius XM. They've come up with a way where we can do our updates from home. So I'm thankful for that. But, you have cabin fever. I'm sure maybe he just felt frustrated and he went about it the wrong way. This is not the time to be arguing over monetary issues. Certainly, as Marley mentioned, all these people out of work and people starving on food bank lines. It's incredible. I mean, the way that everything has turned upside down in the last 2 months. So, I'm sure the cabin fever is getting to a lot of these players, and like fans are reaching out to on these platforms, and the frustrations are starting to come out. But it wasn't the right time or the right way to, as Marley mentioned, she said it beautifully. You can't go about it like that at this point in time with what's happening to the American people.
Howie, I'm also curious your thoughts on the leagues in general, and especially baseball, and how they'll handle whether or not these are legitimate seasons. As someone that handles statistics, can we view this upcoming season, depending on who wins the World Series and what happens in these, 70, 80, 100 games, as legitimate seasons?
I think you have to. I mean, you can. 1981, the Dodgers are not giving back the World Championship, even though the season was cut short. 1995, the season was cut short. 72, people don't remember that. I'm old enough to remember 1972, which was really the first labor issue. If a season is designated to be 80, 90 games, that's the season. Whatever format MLB comes up with, that's how we play it. It goes in the books. If there's a world champion this year, they're going to be the world champions in the history books. So people can argue, it's not a real season. It was 154 games for a long time. Then it became 162. If they went back to 154, is it a real season? Yeah, it's a real season. I mean, there's going to be changes to the structure of the game. The universal DH is likely to come in if they have this short season. And I think if it comes in, it's not going away. I think it's going to be part of baseball from now on if the universal DH is employed. I don't think you're going to see pitchers hit anymore. That's just my opinion. So there's going to be drastic changes to the game on the field itself. And statistically, that will be affected. But we'll have to accept this as a real season. You can't say, it's not a real season when the world champion is going to go in the record books, and that's going to be the world champion from now on.
Folks, if you just joined us, you are tuned into Sports Media in the COVID-19 era. I'm your host, Bobby C. We've got a great panel with us this afternoon. So longtime ESPN radio executive producer John Martin is with us. MLB official scorer, journalist, and author Howie Carpin, and of course, ESPN baseball insider Marly Rivera. John, I wanted to go back to you and basically ask you about this multi-billion-dollar ripple effect that sports is going to feel right now. I know the nation, the world is feeling it, but what specifically do you foresee in terms of this ripple effect that the leagues are going to have to deal with?
Well, I don't know. It's a tough question. In the near term, probably cutting staffs and how transparent they're going to be about that in terms of on the club level and within baseball itself is a question. I mean, and again, when we do get to the point where there's either antibiotics, some type of cocktail that can combat this virus, or if there is a vaccine that comes along, or there is enough testing so that people feel more comfortable and we can expand, larger groups, interacting with each other. How much have people recovered economically themselves to avoid a ticket to the ballpark? So maybe what we will see is that pricing might have to come down in order to make going to games more palatable for the general public, or otherwise it's going to remain maybe for an elite level for people who haven't been adversely impacted by what's happened. And we've talked about, food banks and people out of work and stimulus checks and all these things that you could not have foreseen, just a little more than 2 months ago. So I think it's a very tangled web right now. I think ultimately, because of the rights, agreements that are in effect, and how those might be renegotiated. I don't know particulars about all of these, contracts across MLB, NHL, NBA, NFL. There's definitely going to be some significant impact for sure. Somehow I think far less on teams, leagues, than in terms of the general public and maybe how they can consume sports, live.
John, were you at all surprised at how people have acted in terms of kind of being split on it? Some people are saying bring the sports back. Some people are saying cancel the seasons. I mean, even major notable people in their respective sports, like Shaquille O'Neal, saying, the NBA season's got to go.
Bobby, I think part of it is a function of where you are geographically around the country and what you've seen and what you've been exposed to. And I think probably, for many of us here in New York or the areas that have been devastated by this, there's probably more of a, lean towards, let's forget about this. Let's move on and let's get to, next year and hopefully things are back to normal or as normal as they might be, in the early going. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me, somebody like Shaquille, who has concern, I think, for fellow players, and how things might be transmitted and the impact that could have. There are other people, like we talked about Snell. Hey, if I'm getting paid, then I don't care. Then I don't, I'll go out. But if I'm not getting paid my full time, then I don't want to, get involved in this because I might get sick. Okay, so there's both sides of the story for you. But
Marly,
in short, it doesn't shock me.
Of course, the same felt feeling there for myself. Marly, I wanted to get your take on what you think watching a baseball game will be like with no fans. I know it's something that has happened a couple of times before. It was interesting for me to watch. I don't know if you saw the UFC fight, UFC 249, but to watch a UFC fight with no fans and to be able to hear the fighters a lot better than you normally would. I'm curious what it's going to be like at the ballpark.
Well, I know that you guys can't tell because I put a lot of makeup on, but I haven't slept in like 2 weeks because I've been watching Taiwanese and Korean baseball every night. So that's sort of, that tells you how much of a nerd I am and how starved everybody is for baseball, right? As we know. And I really want to hear John about, if he ever thought that ESPN would be broadcasting Korean baseball, because that's, that's what we're doing right now at 5 a.m. But we are so starved that it comes to a point where it doesn't matter what's on if it's live. The ratings that we had at ESPN with the NFL draft, that it's not even an actual sports event, broke every record in a very long time, because it actually meant that it was something that was happening at that moment, right? The players were being selected at that moment. It wasn't something that was being fed to you, recorded. So I think that part of it excites people. That's what excites us about sports, that we most of the time don't know the result, right? So we are waiting for what's going to happen. So, but it happened, as you mentioned, in April of 2015. Unfortunately, during the riots in Baltimore, the White Sox and the Orioles played a game with no fans, and legendary broadcaster Gary Thorne. I talked to some of the players. Now one of the relievers of the New York Yankees, his name is Zach Britton, and he was then with the Orioles. And he told me, Marley, you could hear the play-by-play from Gary Thorne in the bullpen at the end of the ballpark. So this is going to be a very different experience, but we have seen it. Korea is doing it, right? Taiwan is doing it. We have to learn from them. And it was interesting what John said in terms of testing, which is why I was exhorting anyone who wants to be in sports, just Google real quick what Premier League is doing right now in terms of how they're going to restart their workouts, because they have very strict rules. And I'll just go through them really quick. You have to drive by yourself at the ballpark. You get tested the moment you get tested twice a week. You get your temperature taken in and out. You have to remain 6 feet away from any one of your teammates, and you have to wear a mask unless you're on the field. So there's really just very specific things that are being done to get baseball back. But having no fans in the stands is going to be a blow for the players, particularly who feed off this, right? It's not the same thing. How are you going to pimp a home run when no one is there? How are you going to celebrate a walk-off? It doesn't really mean the same thing when your fans are not cheering you on. So it's really going to be interesting to see. We saw it with Baltimore, but that was one game. So, and the UFC, I have to tell you, I had the opportunity of getting a UFC lesson from Carlos Correa. He's like an expert, and he told me, shortstop for the Houston Astros, for those who don't know who Carlos Correa is, and he said, Marley, I just wanted some live sports, and I enjoyed every minute of it. So if that's any indication of what it could do for sports broadcasting in that sense, and in terms of advertising, like John was saying, then hopefully we're on the right track. But Bobby, in the end, we cannot put 50,000 fans in the stands at this point. It just can't happen, right? So we have to adjust to this new reality in whatever way we have to.
Not until we have a vaccine or a cure. Howie, would it bother you to come to the ballpark and have someone take your temperature in order to come to work?
No, it would not. It's a very easy method. And look, like I said before, I'm willing to deal with whatever regulations or stipulations they make to come to the ballpark. I would trust that they would have enough data and information to actually open the press box and let somebody in. So I would at least have a trust there that they would have the information to be safe. And no, it would not bother me to have my temperature taken going in and going out. If you want to work, these are the things you may have to deal with.
I think about how far-reaching this is going to be, Howie. As someone that was a baseball star in the Bronx scholastically when you were on your way up, I started thinking about, especially with our young youth that are on this, college players, et cetera, that are watching, that are tuned in, how this is going to affect college athletics in the fall, whether or not universities, colleges like Lehman will have students back on campus, and then whether or not we will see athletics. You've already seen some big conferences, power conferences, including the Big East, saying that if everyone's not back, we're not going to have sports back. I was just curious, as someone that was a star here in the Bronx playing baseball, what you think this is going to be like for the student athletes.
Well, first of all, let's put that myth to rest. I wasn't a star. I was pretty good. So, but anyway, a lot of the seniors got burned this year. The senior class lost their whole, especially around here, baseball-wise, you don't really play that many games like they do in California and Florida. They're playing all the time. Here, guys, trying to make it maybe into a major league career or get scouted have a limited amount of games because of the weather and the conditions around here. So that's been squashed for the seniors. And as you were mentioning, it could roll into the fall too, where the fall semester, we used to have a fall baseball season at Lehman College. We play about 15, 20 games in September and October. So, and then you go into the basketball season, volleyball, the girls' sports. I mean, everybody's being affected here, but the seniors are the ones that really got burned this time around. If you're going into your senior year in the fall and you play a springtime sport, you still have a chance to get your season in next year. But the kids that had their season squashed this year, girls softball, men's baseball, girls basketball toward the end of the year, they lost out on their seasons and they won't get those back. So that's the real tragedy, sports wise for those, kids that lost out.
I agree, Howie. And John, as someone that has been such a supporter of your alma mater, Fordham University, and WFUV Sports in particular, a place, of course, that I'm well aware of now since I'm the director there, I was curious on your feelings on what it's been like to have so many of the seniors reach out to you and basically be afraid that they might not be able to get jobs, even more so than before. It's such a tough business to work in to begin with. But now you add in this global pandemic to the mix. How do you think things are going to be for young aspiring journalists moving forward?
Well, I think tough, and because they're going to walk into a new reality of how the business is going to change in terms of some things we've already talked about. Probably the death of one-on-ones, just general press conferences, and that's going to be, by and large, your only access to players, which is, once you get into the business, part of this and how you proceed and advance is the relationships that you create, both with the front office and again with players and with other people behind the scenes. So that's very tough. Again, we'll adjust. Young people will adjust. Hopefully, people who have been in my position understand that as people are coming out of college, seniors, looking to get into the business. And in the long run, it'll probably work out. I just want to touch on one thing about baseball seasons. The seniors, the elite seniors or the elite players in college basketball, college baseball, have lost tremendous opportunities monetarily in many respects in terms of the upcoming drafts. And I can point to one case in particular, which was highlighted in the Post, I think last week, Aaron Sabato from North Carolina and from up here in Westchester. He happens to be related to my wife's husband, and I met the young man on Christmas Eve. He's an extraordinary hitter. There are comparisons to Pete Alonso. And I can just tell you this story. His grandfather was, Aaron, show him the video. So at the North Carolina baseball stadium, he put a baseball on a tee at home plate and hit it over the center field wall. Not once, but twice. And the second time, he stepped away a little disgusted. I really didn't get that. And you heard it bang off the back wall again with his teammates going crazy. What he lost this season is teams did not, baseball, Major League, haven't really seen him in the field. They know what he can do as a hitter. There are questions because he's been primarily a DH. Could he play first base? Could he play outfield? So his question coming out this time, and he'll probably be a first-round pick, is do I go and probably go later in the first round than he might, or do I go back to school? And how much of a season are we going to have in school? Now, in the grand scheme of things, as we've talked about, who cares? But for this young man's future, it's significant. It's a reality. So there are, again, all of these factors, and it just gets more complicated the deeper you drill about how this pandemic has really just turned everybody's world upside down.
You said he's going to be a DH. He may benefit from this new, era in baseball where the DH will be universal.
Good point.
Marley, I wanted to go back to you because, again, to me, you are one of the best I've ever seen in terms of having these connections and relationships with players. That's what makes you such a great insider in the game. And as someone that has been able to forge those kind of relationships with the players and have that kind of access and one-on-one, Do you think it's going to be a problem for you in your reporting to maybe not actually be in the clubhouse? Because I think it is a possibility that most of this stuff moving forward is going to be press conference style.
Well, I mean, I guess the simple answer would be I've done this for a really long time. So I've established myself as a journalist. And what this COVID has done is test your relationships, right? All these many years, all the Wednesday afternoons that I spent at the stadium when I really didn't want to be there, but you were there on a game that, quote unquote, on a Yankees Royals game, on at 2:00 on a Tuesday. And all those days that you spent doing these kind of things, and now those relationships are paying off because the players will pick up the phone for me. It doesn't mean that I think, oh, I made it because I was able to do this. Absolutely not. I consider myself, still a reporter in training. It doesn't matter that I've been doing this for 20 years. The moment that you think you have it figured out, maybe you should leave this business. So it is something that, and especially every year you have new players. Every year you have people that you never met before, that you don't know, and forging those relationships, like John was saying before. Chief said it, this is what our business, this is how the great people who do this job, that's how they're able to do it. Some of them are my colleagues, a Buster Olney, a Jeff Passan, or the way that Ken Rosenthal does it, right? Don Ferducci, who is not only a great reporter, but a great writer. Like the way that these guys did it is spending time there. That's how I did it, spending the time there. And now we're probably, and this is a complete guess, we have no idea how things are going to turn out. We're probably is going to be very similar to a playoff situation. And for you out there who don't know this, we get the players in press conferences. So that's exactly how we don't go into the clubhouse. We don't have, and who knows if we're even going to be allowed on the field, right? To speak to them. Maybe all it's going to be is pressers. And not only that, I wouldn't blame the players because you don't know, right? In terms of interactions, where someone has been, and there's a lot of players who are very concerned about this. So it's going to be interesting, but Bobby, in a very long-winded way, absolutely, it's going to affect their relationships, but it's what we have to do right now. We have to adjust. And one little thing that I wanted to say with something that you asked before to John was how, I'm sorry, I think to Howie, what's journalism going to look like? And, these kids that are coming out, what I'm going to tell you is, and I think maybe I'll sound more hopeful than I need to be, is that 10 years ago, we had no idea what Twitter was. 5 years ago, we didn't know that Instagram Live was going to start happening. I had, till to this day, no freaking clue what Twitch is. So all I have to say is, you guys are in charge of reinventing a business that is dying. The model that we have doesn't work right now. So it is your turn now to recreate it. And maybe we can see it as an exciting time. Maybe we can actually see it in a different way and not say, you know what, the way that we did the business, it really just doesn't work anymore. So now it's up to you to really reinvent the way we do this. And it will suck if you can't talk to the athletes. It's really gonna suck. I mean, I'm sorry to put it so frankly, but me, Bobby, that's exactly how I say it.
Can I just chime in to Marley, to Howie's point earlier about the DH becoming universal?
Yeah.
Once the new reality, comes in, and if we're just limited to press conferences or whatever, even maybe as things start to normalize, players and maybe even PR's departments and ownership may say, well, it worked in the restart. Let's keep it this way. As you know, there are some players who love to talk to the media. They love to schmooze. At least I'd say better than 50%, and Marley, you and Howie can correct me, would be fine not having to say a word.
I think you're being very generous, John, by saying
Okay.
50%.
All right. Well, there you go. So, what the new reality is when things, resume, again, might be very hard to go back to the one-on-ones if we get to a point where people feel safe interacting. I think that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Again, to our fans, especially those that might have just checked in with us, you're tuned into Sports Media in the COVID-19 era with our panelists today, longtime ESPN radio executive producer John Chief Martin, MLB official scorer, journalist, author Howie Carpin, and ESPN baseball insider Marley Rivera. I'm your host, Bobby C. And Marley, I just wanted to also make a quick comment about how much I've enjoyed your social media. Speaking of social media, because you've been able to kind of comment on where the series would have been if the games would have been played, and highlight so many of the people that you've come across in Major League Baseball that have meant something to you. It's been a pleasure to be part of that experience.
Thanks, Bobby. One of the things we need to find joy at this time, and whatever that means to you. And so, and I'm not saying this so you feel bad about me, for me. So I'm just going to say this, but, I lost 2 friends to COVID-19, and it's been a very difficult time in our household and in our family to have gone through this. So I have to bring joy into my life in whatever way I can, right? And I bring it in, and I created this little silly thing that I do every day, which is I tweet out where the Yankees would have been and who they would have been playing. And I find either a picture or a video that I've taken in the last 10 years or so, and I put it out there. And I just put, something that maybe is related to the series. Sometimes I just put a picture that I like. So, and I try to just bring some sort of joy, because I feel that, there's a lot of negativity out there with reason, right? This is a terrible time, but we can't dwell on that all the time, because it's really going to break us, right? And we need to find the positive and the silver lining, quote unquote, in everything. And it is the way I've decided to do it, Bobby. It's silly. Sometimes fans get angry and so on. But
it's been very uplifting. No doubt about that. And again, our condolences to Marlon. Howie, I wanted to turn the conversation back to this whole idea. Again, as someone that wears so many different hats in sports media, I think a lot of things in terms of production, I want to get John's thoughts on this too, will be scaled down. But I also think, as Marley made this comment before, that this opens up a slew of new possibilities, capabilities when it comes to how we do things. So in all of your different roles, I know this weekend with NASCAR coming back, one of the things that they're going to be using is a lot of walkie-talkies for social distancing. Do you expect maybe technology to play a much larger role in how we do things moving forward?
Absolutely. Look at what we're doing right here today as a group. I think fan interaction is going to increase with technology, things like that. There's so many things now you can do away from the ballpark to get people involved. I think that's going to be a growing trend here in the future, to get the fans involved interactively, with the Zoom stuff. I'm sure they'll try and improve it to where they could invite a certain number in without getting hacked and things like that, improve the security of the whole technology. And I think once that happens, I think technology is going to play a big role in the future of sports from here on in.
John, have you ever spent this much time talking to a computer in your life? I know it's an adjustment for me.
I've been on a few Zoom chats now, and some conference call for business, and my wife set up one for my birthday. So, it was really interesting. My best friend, who now winters in Florida, was on it, and my other good friend in San Francisco was on it. So even though we really couldn't go out to dinner here, et cetera, we were confined to the house, I told my wife after, I said, that's one of the best birthdays I ever had, at my advanced age, because my good friends could be a part of it. And there was a lot of, fun and laughter and, needling going back and forth. So, it's been a revelation to me, to be honest with you. And I think Howie makes a great point. And this might be a means in terms of one-on-ones with players, like, hey, if you pass somebody a note or whatever, or you send them a text, later I'd like to do something in depth, can we Zoom or, and again, relationships that you've already built up, those are going to come in very handy, very handy. I just think you were talking a little bit about production. I'll be interested to see if we resume without fans. A lot of times, especially for baseball, the bases are mic'd. There are all sorts of, parabolics that are on field. When we were first getting the national radio rights to baseball, starting with the 98 season, in 1997, to just test out and audition some talent, we went to the Arizona Fall League. And it's no fans, but it's pretty close, at least back that far, that long ago. I'm not sure now. But I heard some stuff when there were some calls that came into question. I heard some stuff that you would never hear in a full stadium. So I think for broadcasters, it might be a challenge, and have to have some thoughts about how well are we going to do our normal setup. Was it, I guess, Zach Britton that talked about that game in Baltimore. In the bullpen, you could hear Gary Thorne's play-by-play.
Yeah.
So I think this will create some challenges because even with nose fans in the stands, once players start to play, their competitive juices will get going, and if they get ticked off, there's probably stuff. I guess you'll have to put the games on delay because there's probably some stuff that will comes out in the normal course of events that we never hear.
Well, John, baseball always gets accused of having no personality, so maybe this is a way of attracting some young fans. I mean, we have to be careful, right, with what's out there. But you know what? I love when they mic players. It's been one of my favorite things that we've done. You know, obviously that we've done at ESPN, and it's really fun. So maybe it'll bring some personality to baseball, and that's not a bad thing.
John,
John, I hear stuff in full stadiums that you don't want to hear in empty stadiums.
Yeah. Occasionally, yeah.
John, I was just going to ask you what you miss most about sports.
Me? Go ahead.
For me, being there, and March 12th, I took a flight out of LaGuardia on my way to Kansas City. I was going to produce the semifinals and the championship game in the Big 12 tournament. And when I get off the plane in Kansas City at 10:30, Mark Kestisher, who was my play-by-play host, we were going to watch the quarterfinals that day. Reed Geddes was our analyst. We were going to watch the quarterfinals, then we'd see all 4 teams that would be playing on Friday. And as soon as I get off the plane, there was a text from Mark. He was already at Sprint Center in KC. Texas was supposed to play in the first game, and they were packing their stuff up. And Kesty was, I don't think we're going to play. And 10 minutes later, I got a phone call. The tournament was banged. So 3 hours later, I was on a flight back to LaGuardia. So the last time I did a live event was February in Milwaukee, the 76ers at the Bucks. And, being on site and being part of a broadcast, Howie being an official scorer or Marley covering a game and that whole interaction pregame, talking to players on the field, covering the game, then getting the backstories after the game. It's tremendous juice in that. It's part of the reason why the 3 of us got in the business. And I don't know that. I'm sure there are other things that can match it, but for us, I don't think there's anything that can match being part of the live event. So that I normally would have done, a good smattering of NBA playoff games, probably some early baseball games, and not to have that. I'm not crying over it, but I do miss it.
Seems like a lot. Howie, your thoughts on what you miss most about sports?
Well, I feel a little guilty missing anything about sports with what's going on, to be honest with you. But, in the sports vernacular, John put it, best, the relationships. When I started in the business, which was 40 years ago, believe it or not, I worked a lot of locker rooms and did a lot of pressers, and as a radio person, you didn't have to be there as much or the same access. Like Marley said, she's there early. She establishes relationships. And a lot of the players really didn't warm up to radio people. They looked at you as just a person who held a microphone. So it was tough, for me to build those relationships. It took a lot longer. And once people got to know you and knew you were sincere about what you were doing, they warmed up to you. But it wasn't easy in the beginning. Now that I'm an official scorer, my relationships are more with the media and the people that work in the press box and work for the team and things like that. And I miss seeing those people, that I interact with on a day of a game. And now some of them won't even be around at all. Kevin Kernan from the Post lost his job. He's a longtime baseball guy. George Willis from the Post, a couple of Peter Body, such good people lost their jobs. And they, when we do come back, they may not be there now. So, it's a little sad in that regard. And I miss those relationships, the interaction with, not just Marley and the media colleagues, but, the Yankee and Met PR staff and the people that work at the ballparks. I've been lucky in my life to have had a relationship with Bob Shepard, which I treasure to this day and things like that. those are the things that I miss. And plus, I do hockey during the winter, so it's the same thing. I miss the PR people and the hockey writers and the media that were at those games. So, the interaction is what I miss. And I feel a little guilty, that I'm missing sports while other people are losing their lives. But I try and at least have them in my thoughts and do what I can to help. If I can do something to help them feel better through this tough time, then I'm going to do it, But that's probably what I miss the most, the relationships.
Thank you, Howie. Marley.
Well, I'm going to try to get through this without choking up. The one thing that I'm going to miss the most is my friend Anthony Causi, the photographer for the New York Post, who was my friend for many, many, many years. And I'm going to miss seeing him not in the well when we're doing broadcasts, and I'm going to miss seeing him. He's not going to be at Citi Field, and he's not going to be at Yankee Stadium, and he's not going to be there. And the point is exactly what Chief said and what Howie said. This business, all of us here, we are privileged to work in it, but it is also our life. A lot of us in the business are either married or partners with people in the business, because I'm going to tell you something, this is our life. We don't meet anyone else. This is really, we spend hours and hours and hours. I get to a ballpark at 2:00 in the afternoon, and I'm lucky if I leave by 1 in the morning, right? So that is the length of my day. And everyone who and everyone who you meet is tied to this kind of lifestyle that we have, that we love and that we are privileged to have. So, you miss, security people at whatever stadium that you've seen for 15 years in a row. You miss a particular restaurant, there's all these things, and media members and these people that are really your family, right? These people are my family, because my family is in Puerto Rico. I see them twice a year. I see all these clowns all the time. It's like I spend the entire, every time at Yankee Stadium, I'm going to see Howie and I'm going to see Bobby C, and I'm going to see Chief in a broadcast. Like, these are the people who are my friends and my family. So I think that's the hardest part. But like Howie said, the most important thing right now, it's not sports, it's health, right? It's health and safety. But man, do we miss it. And do we miss having something on TV that you don't know how it turns out? Bobby, that's the number one thing, that you turn it on. That's why I don't sleep watching Korean and Taiwan baseball, because I miss that energy of not knowing what's going to happen. And you can watch classic games all you want, but you know how that one ended.
Well said, Marley. And I definitely miss seeing you guys in person. There's no doubt about that. At this time, I wanted to take an opportunity to have our attendees be able to ask you guys some questions as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jim Carney.
Santos said it seems like that there's an even greater competition to work in the field of media. And now with quarantine and safety being a priority, it means, is there going to be less opportunity for work? And what can students do with this new sort of environment to try and prepare themselves to get into sports journalism?
I'm going to echo what I said before. This is a very, very difficult time, right, for everybody. And journalism, the pattern that we had, this isn't new, right? COVID is sort of, to use a terrible, metaphor, just sort of, the last straw here of an industry that we needed to figure out a new way to do it. So I don't, the simple answer is I don't know what you can do at this point, but you need to reinvent yourself. And reinvention really is a wonderful thing. And one of the things that you can continue doing as a journalist and as a student journalist is making yourself the best journalist you can be. You do that by reading, you do that by talking to your teachers, you do that by writing, you do that. This is your time to prepare to be the best at what you hope to do. Is it tough? Absolutely. It took me 12 years to break into this business. Everyone sees, oh, look at Marley. She did. You know how many emails I get? Like, oh, I want to work for ESPN. I was like, do you know how many $10 stories I had to have for many, 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 many years? So just, it takes a lot of work to get to some of the positions where we are right now. So just think about it as the greatest training lesson you will ever have, because you have to recreate yourself. You have to identify what kind of journalist you are. And if you don't do it under COVID-19 quarantine, then you're never going to do it. This is the time when you have to realize, this is who I am. This is the kind of journalist I want to be. This is where I want to go. These are the people I want to emulate. These are the people I want to learn from. Reach out to people, find contacts, tweet at them, Twitch, whatever it means. Like all these things, just try to reinvent the way we do a business. I need to tell you guys, the way we were doing it before COVID, our business was dying. it needs to be reinvented. So then you guys can do that, and you actually just have the power to do it. Try to see it as a huge challenge, in terms of, but the one thing that I'll say is become the best journalist you can be. Do the work. It's the line that we always tell each other. Do the work. Don't mail it in, right? Like, do your research, do the work. And that's sort of the only, but I mean, this is a tough business. We're not going to color it. No one here is going to be, telling you that this isn't hard. But I think that COVID can bring you, like a greater realization of who you want to be as a journalist.
If I may add on to what Marley just said, do the work, but do the work without, expecting compensation. In other words, when I was coming into the business, I was told, get yourself out there. Let people know that you're interested. You have so much, opportunity to do that now with social media. Start a blog, start writing your own stuff as if you were working for somebody. Maybe somebody will take notice if you put it out on a social media post. There's plenty of blogs out there. If you're an audio person, like a radio person, do demos with your computer. There's so many ways to do things on your own and produce your own stuff. Get your stuff out there and let it be, public, and maybe someone will hook onto you or some way like that. Start to reach out to people, do what Marley said, do the work, but don't expect to be compensated early on. If you have to do things for nothing, you do them for nothing with the hope of, something down the road. I don't know how internships are going to work nowadays, but you can do so many things on your own from home, as we've been talking about. Take advantage of that. Do a blog if you're a writer. Put out demos if you're a radio person, and maybe somebody will hook on to you, and then you'll be lucky to be employed.
And I want to add one little thing to what Howie said, because it's not only just doing it out there, it's also cutting through the noise. There's a lot of noise out there, right? There's a lot of people who believe they have something to say. Why should we listen or read you? Why? Find the reason. If you can't answer that right now, then you're not ready, okay? What is it that you have to say that is different from what's out there? You need to find your place in this business. You need to cut through the noise, right? Don't write a blog just to write a blog because you want to be like, oh, I want to talk about how many home runs the Yankees breaking the record. Who cares? Like, that's been written out there, right? Identify who you are, like, make it different. And that's how people notice you. You can't do it without cutting through the noise.
And I'd say, Marley, in doing that, have an informed opinion. Do your homework. Don't just throw out, your opinion without frame of reference, something that backs it up, or something that supports your argument. Another thing I'd say, survey the landscape. Being in the sports world, being in the sports media, as we've talked about, is tremendously rewarding. But there are so many other broad-based facets of media. And you might find that there's something else out there that floats your boat. Or you might find that, and maybe, going on to a graduate degree, or maybe a graduate degree in business, and maybe then you're on the business side in the Major League Baseball office, or with the NBA, or with any of the sports leagues. There are many ways to be involved in this business that are rewarding and that can put you, front and center. There are stories of public relations guys who are newspaper guys who've ended up general managers and successful general managers too. And I don't know that in their scheme of things, when they started out, that they, really thought about that. Well, I could be running a team and really making decisions on the personnel and putting together winning formulas. So again, don't just limit yourself to a kind of a narrow focus of sports. Again, explore the landscape.
Bobby, did you want to comment on that?
Jim, along the same lines as the panelists have said already, I think you have to take an opportunity to create fresh content if possible. I mean, so many times we've seen entrepreneurs that end up becoming millionaires during times like this because they don't look at the negative. They look at the possibility that there could be some sort of silver lining. There could be a positive somewhere along the line to create something entirely new. And as Marley said, this is a golden opportunity for young aspiring journalists to seize the opportunity to create new, fresh content, whatever that might be.
Jim, if I may add one little thing,
Sure.
just for my minority people out there. especially because this is Lehman College. I want to tell you, not a lot of people look like me in my business, right? And I want to make sure that you know that we need you, right? There isn't a lot of African American, Asian American, Latin American in any, especially on the production side. And John Martin can tell you that, guys. We need you. We need your cultural background. We need your smarts. We need who you are to make this business more diverse behind the scenes. That is so important. And I want to point out that if that is an aspiration of yours, please, this is a golden opportunity for you to work on behind the scenes stuff, because we're going to have to reinvent production. And if you want to ask some questions, the person next to me, Chief will tell you, this is a new reinvention of where we're going to broadcast things. So we're going to need technical experts that are going to be able to do this. And unfortunately, the cultural diversity that we have, particularly in baseball, is nil. So I want to encourage you, please, especially on the technical field, please stick with it. It's tough, but just stick with it.
Thank you, Marley. That's really important. I'm really glad you said that. Speaking on the technical side of it, and Alexander has a question saying that looking at what the NFL draft, the success of the NFL draft as an extra, if you want to call it that, it's a sporting event that was on ESPN. Can we look to see more of that kind of television and or media that's around the sports as opposed to the games themselves, and how is that going to possibly change the business? Anybody want to take that? John, you want to take that? Chief, you want to take it?
I think maybe again in the near term, and again whatever the near term is, because I think that's still a big question mark. But perhaps next year you might see a similar format for the NFL draft, and maybe for the NBA draft and the baseball draft. I think ultimately leagues would want to get back to, especially the NFL and the NBA, get back to an event in an arena, in a city where there's fan participation, where that just adds that much more to the moment and the excitement. But again, near term, and maybe because of what we talked earlier about economic impact on the leagues, to do it the way that the NFL just pulled it off, and well reviewed as well, that might be the norm going forward, at least for some time. But I mean, those events were always in place anyway. It wasn't new. I mean, there have been drafts. This is just the way they were done. I don't know how you might add any other programming around that, because there's enough talk shows, there's enough blogs, there's enough social media out there, I think, to cover things for now.
Mm-hmm. Howie, did you want to jump in there? Have any ideas on that?
I just think that off-season pressers, like when the Yankees signed a free agent, they used to have this big press conference with a, Marley knows, the buffet and all that stuff. I think you'll see
the only time that they feed the press well, people.
I don't think you'll be seeing that kind of an event anymore. I think you'll see it along these lines, where the reporters will be on a Zoom call with whoever the person of news is, things like that. I think away from the field, things will be more along these lines. As we've been talking about, the one-on-ones, probably going to go away, at least in person. So I think the new technology is going to lend itself to where you won't see those off-season pressers anymore on the sports, where they have a big gathering of reporters in the room.
Mm-hmm. Bobby, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just been impressed, like I said, kind of before, it's similar along those lines about taking advantage of the opportunity. I mean, look at what the Last Dance has been able to accomplish right now. It's not a quote unquote live event, but it's something that ESPN has put out that has drawn a lot of attention. So, I do miss live sports. I'm excited for the return, even in a limited capacity and even without fans. But at the same time, I think for those content creators, especially the youngsters that are on this right now, the focus should be on creating great content. And you can also look back and find archive type content and make something out of it and have it be great. I mean, I think The Last Dance has proven that.
Yes,
If I could
go
just
ahead.
quickly chime
Yeah,
in.
Chief.
My old stomping grounds, ESPN Radio, this past Sunday re-aired Game 4 of the '98 NBA Finals, and this Sunday they're re-airing Game 6, which was Michael's last game in a Bulls uniform. I produced both of those games. In fact, the second three-peat, I produced every one of those conference finals and NBA Finals games. And I have to tell you that listening back to parts of that game last Sunday, being outside of the maelstrom and being able to listen, I was juiced because it was such a great back and forth game, and things we've talked about that we won't see, the background, the ambient sound, the crowd. It was terrific. So there is some upside to that, but the Last Dance, as you've said, is great, and I was inside of a lot of that as that was going on, and there's stuff I'm learning that got past me, which I find fascinating.
By the way, I heard Lenny Dykstra had a really good game in the Met game the other night. We're running a little overtime, but we've got a really good question, I think, to wrap things up. This is from Anna. Anna said, do you think that after the pandemic that people are going to be the same way with sports? Meaning, are they going to feel the same way about their game, whether it's baseball or it's basketball or it's football or it's NASCAR, or is the attitude of the fan going to change? Anybody jump in on that one?
Go ahead.
I don't think so, and I think we've seen it just over the years when there are great catastrophes or natural disasters or things that occur that have impacted us greatly, like here in New York, 9/11, Sandy, now this. After a while, in terms of people's mindset, I think things start to normalize at least, in their mindset. And sports has always been that great release, that chance to step away and, forget about personal tragedies or economic, adverse economic impacts, etc. So I think in the long run, it won't. Again, near term, and however long it takes for the economy to rebound, for people who've been devastated by this economically and personally, to get back on their feet and feel like they're on even keel, that's a whole different question.
I think, like the old adage says, you don't know what you have until it's gone. I think fans should really be humbled by this experience because we've really been blessed to not have to be concerned about health all these years going to games, and now just the fact that we're going through this and trying to manage and do the best that we can. It'll be exciting to have sports back in any capacity, and the fans should be honored to be able to have that.
Molly or Howie, who wants?
That sports they're healing, right? And it's at this time we need a lot of healing. It takes you away from from your troubles, unless you're a Jets fan like me. It just brings you closer to your troubles. But just that time that you spend and that connection that you develop with these people on the screen, which is where they're going to be, it's very important for a lot of people. And I respect the ones for whom baseball or sports are not important anymore, because that's just how it has to be in their life, and the impact of COVID is very, very individual, so it is going to be a personal choice. But the one thing that I hope does happen is that when we finally get fans to a stadium, that it stops pricing fans out of stadiums. So hopefully this is a really good time to make sports more accessible financially for a lot of people. They did a study a couple of years ago where the average family of four, it would be at least $500 to go to a Yankee game. Wow. So, that can no longer happen. So I think it'll be really good if we start embracing, like bringing back the fans to the ballpark. And maybe that's a good way of luring them, lowering price points and so on. So, but sports are healing. So I can't wait for sports to be back. Selfishly, I can't.
Howie?
Yeah, I think we've talked about the labor issues that kept baseball on the sidelines and created an animosity. This is a very unique situation where we have absolutely no sports going on. There's nothing else to latch on to. So I think there's going to be almost a tidal wave when it comes back of popularity. I think the ratings will be off the charts for whatever comes back early. And then I think it'll settle down to pre-COVID, emotions after that. So I think, I think we'll still end up with the same, passion for sports as a whole. I agree with Marley that some people may, they don't have it now and they'll just get used to it and they'll say the heck with it. But I think in the beginning, there'll be a tidal wave because we're so pent up with nothing. With those labor issues, we had other sports to hook onto. Like if baseball was in a labor issue now, we'd have the Stanley Cup playoffs and the NBA playoffs, but we have absolutely nothing. So I think that pent upness will translate into a tidal wave of bringing it back, with great emotion. And then after a while, it'll settle down, calm down. And I think you'll see that sports has lost some of their fans because they got used to no sports. But I think for the most part, the people will still be involved like they were.
Mhm. Well, that will be the last word. I want to give a special thanks to our panel. So thanks, Howie Carpin, MLB official scorer here in New York City. So we look to see you hopefully very soon back in the press box.
Hope so.
John Chief Martin, longtime chief at ESPN Radio and observer of the business. Marley Rivera, Marley, thank you so much, of course, for participating. Well, thank you so much, Bobby C. from WFUV Sports and from Bronxton. I also want to thank Tom O'Hanlon, the chair of the Journalism and Media Studies Department, and James Mann, the Arts and Humanities Dean at Lehman College, and Migdio Dominguez, who's been behind the scenes, pushing the buttons and covering and making sure everything stays together. Thank you, Migdio, and all the people at IT. We will do this again real soon. So once again, on behalf of the Journalism and Media Studies Department at Lehman College, I want to thank the panel, and we will see you all again very soon. So take care.